I stood in my kitchen watching the lemon frosting swirl beneath my spatula. The scent of sugar and citrus filled the room, clinging to the air, like memories I hadn't asked for, but couldn't shake. It was Sierra's favorite, had been since she was a girl with pigtails and scraped knees, running through the backyard barefoot. She used to call it sunshine cake. I had made it every year, through sickness, holidays, and even the year Harold died. This one felt different, though. I'd spent the morning humming to myself, setting the table with her favorite daisies, wiping down the silverware twice. I even ironed the napkins. There was still a part of me, some foolish part, that believed today might soften something in her. At noon, the front door creaked open. Sierra walked in, first coat draped over her arm, her husband Jonas trailing behind with their 2 children. They barely glanced at me as they stepped inside. "Surprise," I said, smiling. "I made something special." Sierra paused in the doorway, her face unreadable. She looked around the room like she didn't recognize it. Or maybe she just didn't care to. "What is all this?" she asked. I gestured toward the cake. "Lemon. Your favorite. I thought we could have lunch like we used to." She crossed her arms. "Mom, you don't get it. I don't need cake or lunch. The best gift you could give me is to disappear from my life." I didn't speak. Couldn't. The words lodged somewhere deep in my chest, sharp and sudden. "I'm tired of you hovering, meddling. Just stop." Jonas looked at the floor. The kids wandered into the living room without a word. They left before I could respond. The door closed hard behind them. I sat down at the table, the one I had set with care, and stared at the untouched cake. The lemon scent still lingered, but it no longer smelled like sunshine. It smelled like something I needed to forget. I wrapped the cake in foil and placed it in the fridge. Then I turned off the lights, one room at a time, until only the hallway lamp remained. And in the quiet, I sat with the words I could not unsay. That night, I sat alone at the dining table, the lemon cake still resting beneath its foil in the fridge, untouched and unnecessary. The room held a kind of stillness that wasn't peace, just absence. The daisy centerpiece had begun to wilt. One petal dropped as I stared at the chair Sierra had briefly filled. Her words replayed in my head over and over, as if hearing them again would somehow make them make sense. "Disappear from my life. How do you raise someone with your own hands, carry them through every illness and heartbreak, and then be told you're no longer wanted? No warning, no build-up, just a clean, cold dismissal." I looked around the house and saw nothing of me in it. The curtains weren't mine anymore. The living room had been repainted in some dull slate gray. Sierra insisted looked more modern. My favorite reading chair was gone, stuffed in the garage to make room for their sectional. Even my bedroom, my sanctuary, was no longer mine. I slept in the guest room now, a space never meant for permanent use. It had all happened slowly. First the requests, then the assumptions. Just until we save enough. It's only temporary. But temporary stretched into years, and I shrank without noticing, inch by inch, decision by decision. I had believed that love was sacrifice, that giving was the language of devotion. But as I sat at that table in the silence, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator, I began to wonder if all I'd done was teach them how easily I could disappear. I stood up and walked toward the guest room, my steps heavy, but something inside me stirring for the first time in a long while. I didn't cry that night, not out loud anyway. I sat on the edge of the guest bed and stared at the worn photo of Harold on the nightstand. His eyes always looked amused, even in stillness. I used to tell Sierra she had his smile back when she let me. I traced the edge of the frame with my finger and let my mind drift to the years that came after he died. Sierra was only 7. I remember the way she clung to my leg at the funeral, how her small hand trembled in mine. I didn't have the luxury to fall apart. Grief had to wait. Rent was due, and a little girl still needed breakfast and clean socks. I picked up night shifts at the hospital cafeteria, working doubles when I could. During the day, I stitched Halloween costumes. One year, a full butterfly set with hand-sewn wings. I remember Sierra twirling in the living room, the fabric catching light like stained glass. I had barely slept that week. Art school had offered me a late scholarship that same fall. I remember holding the acceptance letter in one hand and Sierra's dentist bill in the other. It wasn't even a decision, really. Dreams were a luxury I couldn't afford. I didn't resent it. I truly didn't. I loved her with a kind of fierceness that felt holy. Each sacrifice was an offering, a way to keep her safe, give her more, spare her from feeling the absence of the man she would barely remember. I told myself for years that it would all be worth it, that one day she'd understand, that my quiet giving would become her compass. But now, at 62, I wondered if what I taught her wasn't love, but convenience. I leaned back against the headboard and closed my eyes. The house creaked softly as it settled, the same way my body did now, aching in the places I used to ignore. They were all sleeping under my roof, and yet I'd never felt more like a stranger in my own life. In the morning, I would make coffee. I would fold the laundry. But tonight, I finally allowed myself to ask, if none of this was seen, what exactly had I spent my life building? 3 days passed without a word from Sierra. No apology, not even a strained good morning. Good. Just the sound of doors opening and closing, of coffee being brewed and emptied without a second cup offered. The children barely looked up from their screens. Jonas offered a nod once, but it felt mechanical, like habit rather than kindness. I kept folding their laundry. I kept wiping down the counters. I even refilled the hand soap in their bathroom when I saw it was low. But something in me had gone quiet, stopped reaching. On Thursday afternoon, I stepped into the hallway. Just as Sierra walked into the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear. She didn't see me, or maybe she did and didn't care. She should just sign the house over to us, she said. She's too old to manage it. Honestly, it would be easier if we didn't have to tiptoe around her all the time. I stood frozen behind the doorway, her voice carving something raw inside me. There was a pause. Then she laughed low and unkind. No, she won't fight it. She never does. I turned away before I could hear more. My hands felt cold. Not angry, hollow. Like every part of me had been peeled back and the center was nothing but air. That night, I sat at the dining table with a blank page open in front of me. The kitchen light buzzed softly overhead. I picked up my pen and let the words come without permission, without editing. I have been invisible, but not anymore. I didn't know what that would mean yet. Not exactly. But writing it felt like reaching for a thread I had let go of years ago. I closed the journal and placed it gently on the table. Then I turned off the light and went to bed with the quiet certainty that something had shifted. Not in them, in me. The following morning, I took the bus into town. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't leave a note. Let them think I was at the grocery store or walking in the park. I clutched my old leather folder the whole way, filled with documents I hadn't looked at in years. Bank statements. The deed to the house, the will Harold and I drafted when Sierra was 10. The law office was on the second floor of a weathered brick building. A plaque on the door read, Renee C. Warren, Attorney at Law. She looked to be in her early 50s with short gray hair and kind, steady eyes. She offered me tea. I declined. I want to freeze access to all joint accounts, I said, my voice steady. Update my will, and reclaim sole authority over the property. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded. You're not being cruel, she said gently. You're being clear. I didn't cry. I didn't apologize. We spent the next hour reviewing papers, adding names, removing others. Renee explained each form slowly, giving me space to ask questions. but I found I had none. Every step felt right. Not easy, but right. When I stepped back outside, the wind felt different on my skin. Sharper, maybe. Or maybe I had just noticed it for the first time in years. On the way home, I stopped by the bakery and bought myself a small cinnamon roll. Just one. I ate it in the park near the bus stop, surrounded by strangers and late falling leaves. It wasn't a celebration. Not exactly. But something in me had shifted. And this time, I wouldn't be tucking it away. Sierra found out within 2 days. I'd barely folded the receipt from the lawyer's office into my drawer when she came storming into the kitchen, her phone still clutched in her hand like a weapon. "What did you do?" she shouted, eyes wide with fury. "The accounts? Why can't I access the savings? Why is everything locked?" I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at her and said, "Because they're mine." She blinked like she didn't understand the words, like I had spoken in a language she had never bothered to learn. "You're insane," she hissed. "Do you want me and the kids out on the street?" I folded the dish towel I'd been holding. "You'll figure something out." She didn't respond, just walked out, slamming the pantry door on her way. That evening, she made the calls. First her cousin in Idaho, then someone from the church we hadn't attended in years. I heard snippets. "She's changed after everything we've done, throwing us out with nothing." Her voice cracked, for effect, softening in all the right places. The next morning, I opened my inbox to messages I hadn't asked for. One said, "You'll die alone." Another, "No wonder she wants nothing to do with you." Most were unsigned. I read them once and didn't answer. Even Jonas, who had always hovered in the background like an afterthought, stopped making eye contact. He walked past me without a word, his footsteps louder than they needed to be. The house felt colder, though the thermostat hadn't changed. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Instead, I opened the garage and dragged my old armchair back into the living room. I pulled the slate gray blinds down and rehung the floral curtains. I sewed the year Sierra left for college. I bought a bouquet of daisies and set them in the center of the table, not because they were her favorite, but because I realized I liked them too. In the quiet that followed, I sat down in the chair that was finally mine again and let the silence settle like a new kind of peace. I waited until the dishes were done and the kids were upstairs. The kitchen was still warm from dinner, the scent of garlic and tomato lingering in the air. Sierra was scrolling on her phone, one leg tucked beneath her on the couch. "I need to talk to you," I said. She didn't look up. "What now?" I sat across from her and placed the printed bank statements on the coffee table between us. "There are withdrawals I didn't make, thousands of dollars missing." Sierra glanced down, then back at her screen. "We needed it. The kids' school stuff, the car repairs. You wouldn't understand. You didn't ask." Her thumb froze mid-scroll. "Why are you being so dramatic? You have more than enough. Don't you think it's time you started thinking about us?" I looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't 12 anymore, begging for ballet shoes. She was a grown woman asking for more of me than I had left to give. "I've spent my whole life thinking about you," I said quietly, "but I won't let you take from me in silence anymore." Sierra rolled her eyes. "You're old, Mom. You don't need all this. It's just space and money." "What are you even holding on to it for?" I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. "Then you'll need to build your life without me," I said. For a moment, she didn't speak. The room seemed to pull tight around us. I stood and gathered the papers. "You can stay until the end of the month," I added. "But after that, I need my house back." Sierra didn't follow me when I left the room, and for the first time, I didn't look back to see if she would. The papers were served the next week. Sierra tore them in half and threw the pieces at my feet. "This is my home too," she screamed. "You've lost your mind." "No," I said, calm, even as my hands trembled. "I found it." Jonas didn't say a word. He stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes dull. He'd grown too comfortable here, no rent, no real responsibility. When I asked him once to take out the trash, he said, "That's your chore, isn't it?" Now he just shook his head and muttered, "You're tearing this family apart." I almost laughed. I think that part had happened long before any paper was signed. In the days that followed, Sierra called anyone who would listen. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, old friends from church, neighbors. The phone rang non-stop, with voices asking how I could be so heartless. They parroted her words. "After everything she's done for you. She took you in. You'll die alone, Marlene." The whispering started too. On the sidewalk. At the grocery store. Pity and judgment in equal measure. But one afternoon I found an envelope on my porch. No return address. Inside was a folded letter from Mrs. Trent, who lived 2 doors down. "Marlene, I've lived across from you for 20 years. I saw how much you carried, how little they noticed. I never said anything, but I want you to know I see you. I always have." I held that letter like it was something fragile and sacred. Then I folded it carefully and tucked it into my journal. Later that night, I stood at the window watching the porch lights flicker on across the street. For the first time in a long while, I knew I wasn't as alone as they wanted me to believe. The house had been quiet for months. No footsteps overhead, no slammed doors, no lights left on in every room. Just the soft hum of solitude, the kind that grows roots. I filled my days slowly reorganizing closets, reading old novels, even repainting the kitchen cabinets in a shade of pale blue I chose for no one but myself. Then one evening, the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew the voice the moment she spoke. Mom. Sierra's voice was thinner than I remembered, the edges frayed. "We're struggling. The kids, they miss you." I shouldn't have said those things before. I leaned against the counter. My hands were dry from gardening, and I rubbed my thumb across my palm to stay grounded. "We just need a little time," she continued, "just until we get back on our feet. Please." I closed my eyes. I could picture them, her Jonas, the kids sprawled in the living room, voices echoing my world, shrinking again, piece by piece. And still, I missed them. God help me, I missed them, but not enough to go back. "I'm sorry, Sierra," I said, "but I can't go back to how it was." Silence. Then she hung up. I held the phone to my ear for a few seconds longer, listening to the static where her voice had been. Later that night, I found myself staring at the guest room door. The one they used to call theirs. It stayed shut, just like I needed it to. I found the sketchbooks in a box labeled Old Linens buried in the back of the hall closet. Most of the pages were blank. A few held half-drawn flowers and faces I'd forgotten I knew how to shape. My hands shook as I traced the lines, hesitant, faded, but still mine. At the community center, I signed up for a beginner's art class. I almost didn't go. The first day I sat in my car for 15 minutes before walking in. But when I entered the room and smelled pencil shavings and linseed oil, something inside me loosened. Each week, I returned. I drew quiet things, leaves, teacups, hands folded in rest. The instructor, Claire, encouraged me gently, never asking why someone my age was just beginning again. One day she leaned over my shoulder and said, "Your lines know where they're going even when you don't." At home, I planted lavender and rosemary in the empty flower beds out front. My knees ached, but the earth was warm and forgiving. I watched bees circle the blossoms and felt a calm I didn't know I'd missed. The house changed slowly. I took down the canvas prints Sierra had ordered online and replaced them with my own sketches. Small at first, then larger, bolder. I bought new curtains. I moved my armchair to the sunniest corner and drank tea in the afternoon with no one interrupting me. One evening, I laughed, really laughed at something I read in the paper. The sound startled me. I hadn't heard it in so long it felt unfamiliar. But it was mine. And it was real. And when I stood at the window that night watching the rosemary sway in the breeze, I felt something I hadn't in years. I felt home. The spring art showcase was held in the community center's multi-purpose room, where folding tables wore linen skirts and paintings leaned gently on wire racks. I arrived early with my small portfolio tucked under my arm hands, faintly trembling, unsure if what I'd made belonged on any wall but mine. Claire greeted me with a smile. "You showed up," she said, helping me pin up my favorite sketches. Lavender stems, aging hands, a child's face turned toward the sun. As people filtered in, I stayed near the back, half expecting to be overlooked. But they stopped. They paused. They asked questions. One woman tilted her head at a drawing of a kitchen window and said, "There's something about this that feels like breathing." I didn't say much, just nodded and said thank you, holding the quiet in my chest like something precious. Later that week, there was a knock at the door. 2 neighborhood girls stood on the porch, a basket of muffins between them. "Hi, Mrs. Kerrigan," one of them chirped. "Our mom says your garden inspires her." I knelt to their level and smiled. "Tell her I said thank you." They ran off down the sidewalk, their laughter light and careless. That evening, I sat by the window in my armchair, the last light of day resting on the rosemary outside. I opened my journal and wrote, "I thought disappearing meant loss. But maybe I was never seen until now." For so long I had poured myself into the lives of others, measuring my worth by what I gave, how quiet I could be, how little space I could take up. But now, here in this home, I had reclaimed inch by inch. I realized something simple and startling. I was never meant to disappear. I was meant to take root.